All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jack Ulrich, CMO at Heartt.com, and this is the next installment of our Heartt.com Thought Leadership series, where we have conversations with operators who have done the work and are willing to talk about what it actually takes and what it looked like. Today's conversation is with Madeline Heartt, Senior Director of Sales Operations at ILIA Beauty. ILIA has been one of the most interesting growth stories in prestige beauty over the last several years. They went from fulfilling orders out of a trailer, which you'll learn a bit more about later today, to managing multi-channel operations across direct-to-consumer, Sephora, and now Ulta. Madeline has been inside that growth from the beginning, and she's here to talk about what the fulfillment side of that journey actually looked like. I'm also joined by Joe Barth, our Chief Logistics Officer here at Heartt.com. Joe oversees the fulfillment business that we've built for brands like ILIA Beauty, and he'll be the platform side view throughout the conversation. If you have any questions for any of today's panelists, please drop them into the Q&A feature, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. So let's get straight into it. Madeline, can you take us back to the early days of ILIA's fulfillment operation? What did it look like? I know I sort of alluded to a storage unit trailer there. What did it look like when the brand was just getting started?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, number one. So happy to be here. I joined ILIA in 2019. The brand itself was founded in 2012, and before I was involved, it was truly a founder packed out in a garage type of operation. When I joined ILIA in 2019, we were already on the cusp of expansion. We had already made our way into Sephora, but behind the scenes, we were still a very scrappy, homegrown operation. We did do our fulfillment out of a storage unit. We had some really fantastic fulfillment partner that operated out of a two-unit storage unit. We had essentially a makeshift second floor made out of plywood in one storage unit where we had all of our inventory stored, and our orders were packed out on folding tables below with a really, really small loose pick closet, if you will. We also had a second storage unit, which I'm pretty sure we may have a photo that we can share with everyone. I think really kind of picture speaks, says a thousand words about the state of our fulfillment in 2019. So we were already in Sephora at this point in time. We were fulfilling out of this particular storage unit, and we were really, really scrappy. But that's one of the kind of magical pieces that I walked into, is that those fulfillment partners were people that they were small, intimate, they worked tirelessly, but they were just really not built for the growth that we were about to see. That really became clear in Black Friday 2019 for us. We had our biggest sales day ever. That year, we were still a sub $10 million brand. But we got 4,000 orders for our the first Black Friday, Cyber Monday that I was a part of ILIA. But we could only do about 400 orders a day. That's almost with like 24-hour shifts, because the family operation, they had everybody kind of all hands on deck to help clear our volume. But that took us 10 days to catch up to our Black Friday, Cyber Monday volume. And that really made it crystal clear. We had outgrown that setup. We could no longer continue the way that we were. We had already begun onboarding a larger fulfillment partner. So it really, me walking into that scenario really showed me that we had already made the right call. It was time to take the next step up and enter really a real 3PL that could offer us all of the options that we really needed to. And that's really how I began at ILIA.
Yeah, so was that like, you had a very scrappy approach leading up to that point. Was that Black Friday, Cyber Monday really the tipping point or the breaking point that made you realize, hey, we need to upscale our operations here and take this to a more enterprise or larger style 3PL? Or was it a culmination of a bunch of different things?
It was definitely, that was one of the first ones with ILIA. However, our Black Friday, Cyber Monday in 2020, we had already moved to our larger and our first big 3PL. But we had a similar situation where we were growing at a pace in 2020. And we all remember 2020 was the year that COVID came on the scene. We had not anticipated significant growth that year because of how precarious that situation was. But we did have kind of a magic moment in 2020 where we everyone was looking at their phones. Everyone had a little bit of extra money to spend. And people were really responding to the type of marketing that ILIA was putting out in a way that we really didn't anticipate. So we had moved to a real 3PL, but we were still our volume was far too big in a very unanticipated way for 2020 Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Black Friday, Cyber Monday 2020, it took us 18 days to clear our order volume. It was a significant jump. It was like 500% order volume year over year. But we did worse on Black Friday, Cyber Monday 2020 than we did in 2019 in terms of time to clear our open order queue. So there were definitely, that's just one milestone that came after our next big leap that really showed us at that point we also still needed to continue to push to move into a larger space within that 3PL and get into a larger building. But beyond that, I would say the hardest thing that we had to realize as we were going through this growth period is that the freedom that we had with our smallest fulfillment partner in that storage unit was, like I said, they're amazing. They worked on Christmas to help us catch up. We could invent things on the fly. We could make a new kit and they would assemble them the same day. But once we moved to a new 3PL, we understood like we had outgrown that setup. And we lacked a lot of structure that was necessary to be operating at a large 3PL at that point. So, for example, during that 2020 Black Friday, Cyber Monday, we planned a gift with purchase, but we had failed to ensure that that product was in packaging with a barcode. So, of course, no barcode, very challenging to put it in a box and put it through a really sophisticated DTC 3PL fulfillment system. So at our old partner, we might have improvised, but at scale, you need everything planned in advance, like something like this. So we really had to learn how to shift from doing just about anything on the fly to being able to plan every detail, forecasting, buying ahead, being really prepared for those kinds of moments. It was really tough for us to weather that storm and everyone grow out of the flexibility that our old partner had afforded us, but was just not possible for us to continue to scale. So that's really that year between 2019 and 2020 is when we really went from scrappy to truly scalable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Joe, when brands come to Cart at this inflection point, they're experiencing massive growth. They're growing leaps and bounds and outgrowing partners left and right. What do you typically see as the biggest operational gap they need to close first before transitioning into some of these larger partners?
Yeah, what we see is a pretty consistent pattern, and Maddie's certainly hitting on it. It isn't necessarily capacity or headcount. It's really around reliable systems that do enforce a source of truth for inventory and order execution. What that really looks like in a practical state for this inflection point is we see that when brands come to us, they're in this like gray zone where they're growing so fast. They have maybe Shopify or another storefront is kind of the inventory system. There's a 3PL, similar to the ILIA story, or maybe other tools tracking inventory and order fulfillment. There's probably some spreadsheets that are filling in the gaps, and certainly a lot of people that are working really hard to help kind of pull all this together, that are constantly providing overrides or fixes in the system. This approach does work for a while, and certainly, listening to the story, you guys have had some tremendous growth and success, and it was a lot of hard work, I'm certain. But we see this common when brands come to us, and so once order volume and or channel complexity does increase, you can see this if you're still using this approach. Typically, you see some inventory drift, or you see some overselling or back orders, or you see triage of orders around how prioritization is being handled or routing is being handled. A lot of manual intervention through either Slack or email to kind of get things orchestrated correctly. And then sometimes you see inconsistent performance around fulfillment and challenges there. In order to close that gap, and especially at scale, you need to see these types of systems be put in place in order to eliminate the tribal knowledge or the manual decision making, or close enough inventory accuracy approaches put in place are being performed. And so what we see that really requires, it's not necessarily around tools. It's actually sometimes more about just enforcing the discipline. And Maddie, you kind of alluded to that. It is adhering to really one system of record for inventory, and kind of adhering to those processes that do enable scale. It's about limiting the manual adjustments, or limiting the amount of interaction that's required to fulfill volume at a higher throughput. So from a WMS execution, right, like you need more traceability and more visibility to enable that. And so we see that through really clear systems that get put in place within our systems, so that we provide that visibility. And then just other aspects as we get into omnichannel conversations in a little bit. Order orchestration is really important. Defined routing logic, clear prioritization, rules for handling exception orders or partials and back orders. That's all really important. But as we see brands come to us, this kind of a shift into like a one source of truth system and approach around adherence to processes is certainly a big challenge, because there's been so much effort and sweat and tears, blood, sweat, and tears poured into getting the brands to where they are now. We recognize that, and we want to find ways to kind of acknowledge that, but then help that transition to take place.
Yeah, scalability is a massive thing here. There's a good quote that reminds me of, like, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And I think that's kind of true from an operations standpoint as well, where if you want to scale much larger, you can brute force things for a while, but those systems tend to break down over time. On that topic, getting into more omni-channel, Madeline, when ILIA expanded into Sephora at scale and then ultimately into Ulta, what changed about your fulfillment requirements? What did retail demand that DTC didn't?
DTC is a very fast-paced, flexible fulfillment business channel, and it has radically different requirements than a Sephora Ulta. And Sephora and Ulta are our two largest retailers, but we have a really significant amount of wholesale business partners. So we really understood that we needed to have a really robust B2B fulfillment plan and strategy. There was a lot of, even when we were already in Sephora, we had a lot of challenges around strategic structure of how, and a lot of what Joe has already alluded to is, the lack of proper guardrails around our processes. For example, having really like a lack of inventory allocation strategy and how to prioritize order volumes. We really had to learn how to balance both a very fast-growing D2C business while also taking on additional wholesale partners year over year in very significant expansion. So we expanded into, for example, we were already in Sephora US when I joined ILIA, but we did scale into them in more stores over time. We also expanded into Sephora Canada, Sephora at Kohl's. And each time we did that, we faced a lot of challenges because it was, whether we had not properly planned our stock for those launches, we weren't great at managing our shelf life requirements, or we were simply a team that was very small, being stretched very thin. Retail really demands discipline in order fulfillment accuracy. You need a B2B partner that is going to be able to fulfill you and ensure that the extension of your brand in terms of protecting you against chargebacks in terms of compliance issues. Having someone that's very, very strong, fulfilling your B2B and ensuring that we're limiting together the cost of doing business with these partners is incredibly important. When we expanded into Ulta in 2024, we had luckily learned a lot from all of the challenging situations we had found ourselves in over the previous 5 years. We began planning Ulta for over a year and a half in advance in terms of especially acquiring the amount of inventory that would be necessary to expand into their stores. So we needed every product forecasted, every EDI process tested. We worked closely with Heartt, who is our fulfillment partner at this time. We started all of our testing and inventory reservation 6 months out. Heartt was a fantastic partner in this particular onboarding of the partner. And it was one of those situations, like especially in operations, when you do things correctly, no one really notices. But it was an incredibly rewarding day for me to see a massive amount of pallets stacked, ready for pickup on the cart floor in Groveport in Ohio. Over a million, easily a million units. And I remember I sent up a picture to my husband and said, "This is the most significant thing I've ever done in my professional work life." And he was like, "Okay, cool." This is a bunch of boxes. But in a way that feeling of everything flowing the way that it should have and how uneventful was an incredible achievement on our part as well as Heartt's part. So really it's about that very disciplined planning. Whereas with D2C, you can really adapt on the fly and be flexible. I think both spaces for operators can be incredibly rewarding, but they do require different disciplines and the ability to understand the difference and have that discipline laid out for you for long-term success.
Yeah, and ILIA's in a bunch of different channels now. I mean, are you thinking of those as separate operational systems, or are you finding ways to unify those to make sales and broader operations a bit easier?
I always try and simplify as much as possible. It's one business with different channels. Everything, as much as possible, flows through the same operational structure. So, for example, our ERP is our record of truth. Everything comes into our ERP and then goes downstream to Heartt for fulfillment. I've seen a lot of different tech stacks and different organizational processes that kind of route out and away from your record of truth and then backfill into your record of truth to give you the data after that it's been done. But that can make things really challenging when you do want to have a flexible business. Because like I said, D2C is fast, reactive. If something sells out, we want to be able to pivot quickly. But with retail, Sephora, Ulta, and all of our other wonderful partners requires months of planning. We try to unify that as much as possible. So we are single node still. No separate warehouses. We do have other warehouses in other countries, but we're a single node with Heartt in the United States. And that really affords us still key flexibility as our business is still growing a significant amount year over year. This allows us to reallocate based on where we need inventory most day over day. And so we don't have a lot of, we have inventory in the wrong place at the wrong time. Um, for Sephora and Ulta, they're our biggest retailers. They actually drop orders to us on the same day. We actually put those into a sophisticated workbook process that we have that analyzes sell-through, shelf life, forecasts, etc. That really allows us to rebalance stock towards whichever retailer needs it the most. And don't forget, we have, again, dozens of additional wholesale partners that also are incredibly important for us to serve as much as possible and fill their orders as much as possible. So it's really important for us to try to think about them within a single system in separate channels with having the flexibility to move between them. So this approach really makes sure that we don't prioritize one channel over another permanently. It's always an ongoing conversation. Sometimes D2C needs the spotlight, sometimes it's our wholesale partners. And that allows us, by really unifying them together, both operationally and systematically, it's a fluid system that allows us to adapt.
Yeah. And Joe, from the Cart.com side, when a brand crosses into omnichannel and they're expanding and growing the different channels in which they're selling through, what does the fulfillment infrastructure have to do differently to accommodate this? And what is really the hardest thing to get right in that process?
Man, I just want to acknowledge like the achievement. I love that quote, Maddie, just really quick about it's your greatest achievement in your professional career. And maybe just how your husband didn't quite acknowledge that. Certainly for people in logistics, we would be like jumping up and down for you as far as the accomplishment, because I can just attest to the fact of how you pour into the partnership and take these onboardings really serious and your involvement in that one specifically. So man, maybe we just need a different group that you share those moments with to make sure you get the right acknowledgement based off of all your hard work on that. But to Jack's question, maybe I'll go back to Jack's question. And omnichannel is tough, right? Like there's a lot of shift that is required, and Maddie certainly alluded to it. But it's just not more orders from more places like direct to consumer. It's actually a fundamental shift of what we're optimizing for in the fulfillment systems. And it was alluded to that direct to consumer is really about speed and volume and a consideration of that end consumer experience and then the cost per shipment. But when you go into omnichannel, you're really balancing a very different set of priorities. You're thinking about the service level and compliance, channel specific rules, inventory allocation, and how for multiple how it's competing across multiple venues and wholesalers. So there's a really big shift that has to occur. And what we experience is from a fulfillment standpoint, we want to try to acknowledge where that shift requires us to actually create a divergence in the processes. So we don't think of it as one fulfillment operation per se, because each approach does require specific requirements and specific infrastructure to enable each channel and process to scale. So when you're running these multiple your workflows, direct to consumer, you're thinking about it from an each pick or speed, and you're thinking again as far as that final pack out and the presentation to the customer and the unboxing experience. But then on the retail side, it might be case or palette in the case of what Maddie was alluding to, and that comes along with labeling requirements and vendor requirements of routing guidelines and other strict compliance around scheduling windows. And then if you think about one other channel that's really growing, which is in marketplaces such as FBA or FBM, there's unique prep requirements, and then specifically there's inbound scheduling rules that you have to follow as well. And so what all this means is really different pick strategies, different packing and labeling stations, different QA processes, and then often we process in different physical zones of the facility, physical areas of facilities. And certainly, even for ILIA, that's the case, where we try to specialize and target the capacity that's required and meet those requirements with the most optimal setups that are needed. This, this shift compliance and omnichannel is probably the most important because of the introduction of the routing guidelines and the ASN requirements and labeling standards, delivery windows, routing rules. There's just a list of things that get introduced as you come into omnichannel and wholesale requirements. And obviously, the challenge on the other side of that is if you don't do it right, there's a lot of problems. That there's refused shipments or chargebacks or relationship damages that occur with these wholesalers. And so it's just a completely new muscle outside of direct to consumer, and it's a shift as you kind of migrate from maybe a brand that's a direct to consumer native brand into full omnichannel. I would just also call out that we're talking a lot about, forward logistics on this, but obviously as you get in omnichannel, there's even other complications that get introduced, such as reverse logistics. And that just is in of itself is a different process. Again, very different than direct to consumer and really the customer experience that's expected. And as you shift into retail, what you see from bulk returns and or unsellable goods, damage considerations, and then there's even kind of that again on marketplaces, unique requirements that they have around returns and how they need to be handled. And so I just call that out because each one of those, both from a forward and reverse, do have different dispositions, SLAs, and then even, from a brand standpoint, significant changes in financial implications from a returns perspective, especially. So really just overall, I think that the shift from direct to consumer to omnichannel is really complex. It needs to be really thoughtfully planned, with clear intentional follow-up, and then from a operations standpoint, continuous execution.
Thanks, Joe. And we've talked quite a bit around, I mean, that speaks again to the scale side of things and like how going omni-channel can increase that scale. A lot of considerations that need to happen on that side. I want to spend a bit of time just talking about what that scale actually requires from the business standpoint. Maddie, like, what do most brands underestimate about fulfillment when they're scaling this fast? You guys have grown leaps and bounds, as we've talked about over the past several years. Where do you see brands tend to get into trouble in that type of scale and growth when it is so rapid?
One of the biggest traps I see brands fall into during rapid scaling is underestimating how far ahead they need to plan, especially when it comes to systems and technology. And that's on both your internal tech staff on your brand side, as well as your fulfillment tech that your fulfillment partner can offer you. Fulfillment tech is continually evolving, and having a partner that is willing to invest in and grow fulfillment tech with you is really important. For example, we moved off of a pick to paper line at Heartt in 2024 and onto a pick to light line, and we've since expanded that pick to light line to be able to as quickly as within a couple of days, stand up a second or even a third pick to light line to handle our volume. Working with fulfillment partners to ensure that you scale into sustainable technology in fulfillment that can help cover your additional potential growth within the next 1 to 2 years is extremely important. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly triaging with your fulfillment partner how you clear your open order queue on a day-to-day basis while you're trying to figure out how do I get into a fulfillment technology strategy that is right size for your business. In addition, outside of, of course, I think beyond the technology point, You have to be extremely bold with your inventory and your forecasting, especially if you're anticipating a significant lift, because having right stock at the right time is incredibly vital to your business. A lost sale to a lost customer could be a lost customer forever. But going back to technology, I see often that brands at their inflection point are maybe choosing technology in their tech stack that's too small for their future. They're onboarding a basic ERP or a cheaper integration partner because it fits them at that moment. But you're going to go through months of implementation and then you outgrow it within 2 years. And suddenly you're scrambling to fix the foundation while you're also scaling and trying to, out technology yourself into a better situation. So, for example, in 2020, we avoided that by really switching all of our tech stack into robust systems that were far outsized for our revenue at that moment. We moved to a top tier ERP. We upgraded our integration partners. We adopted leading EDI partners, all while growing extremely rapidly. We changed nearly every system in our tech stack in 3 months, which is an incredibly fast timeline. It was tough. It probably took a couple of years off of my life, but it really meant that when the growth hit, we already had the tools to scale with us. We did not have to do any of that re-engineering or reimagining of how we were handling our growth while it was underneath of it. We had plenty of additional challenges during that growth to keep up with our own inventory. But being proactive and choosing a technology that grows with you will really save you time from having to re-implement systems when you can at least afford the disruption.
Yeah, and you touched on something there around the impact that really fulfillment or order fulfillment can have on customer relationships and the impact that it can have there more largely. I think it's an often overlooked area of fulfillment in terms of that partnership, really kind of like discussing where does operations end and the brand begin in terms of that handoff to the customer itself. So how do you think about that relationship between your fulfillment partner and the brand's customer experience itself?
In my view, there's no dividing line between fulfillment and customer experience, especially for D2C. And before I go on, I just want to give a shout out to our ILIA's Heartt D2C manager, Nanad, who I know is on this webinar. I see you. Thank you so much for everything that you do at ILIA. And people like Ninad and the entire D2C workforce that handles ILIA's orders make or break the customer experience. Once the customer clicks buy, everything that follows is an extension of your brand. So how fast does that order get to the warehouse? How quickly is it fulfilled and shipped out the door? The customer expects speed, transparency, and quality. They don't get a shipping notice quickly, tracking's not clear. If the package arrives poorly presented, the brand loses trust. Amazon, unfortunately or fortunately for all of us, set a very high bar, and customers expect that precision from every D2C experience that they have. But beyond speed, it's really about presentation and care. The unboxing moment of a customer getting your package that they paid and waited patiently for should really represent your brand's quality. Customers don't want a dented box, items thrown in carelessly, not packed out in a way that represents, for ILIA, a premium beauty brand. The fulfillment partner is the final touch point between your brand and your customer. And if the experience doesn't match the value of the product, you've completely missed the mark. So your fulfillment team has to care as deeply about the customer's experience as you do, because to me and to the customer, they're one and the same. There is no distinction between what your fulfillment partner is doing and what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a direct reflection on the brand itself and on
Absolutely.
the whole experience. And Joe, for brands we've heard the margin for error is incredibly low there. At Heartt, how do we prioritize building to serve brands at that scale reliably?
Yeah, I actually just want to add to what Maddie's saying. Maddie, I appreciate the shout out to the Growport team. I think that's awesome. But I also I think it's important, like one of our core values is being brand obsessed. And so this integration of like how fulfillment is the final touch, we all take it very serious at Cart. And I personally, if it's a bad experience or a good experience, whatever that experience is, I often get feedback from our customers. And it really resonates with us here, right? Like that we have to really embody the brand and understand that brand because of the how consumers react to their final experiences at least our fulfillment centers. And so I just wanted to underscore that sense of importance that Manix is speaking about, that it's really part of who we want to be as a partner. And obviously, if we have issues or if there's feedback from customers, we want to take it very seriously and make sure that we course correct across the board and make sure that those experiences do really delight the customer, the end consumer. And so it's really of paramount importance for us as a partner for ILIA, but all brands to have that experience for them. Man, but as I think about like your question, Jack, around what are we doing to prioritize in order to help scale, there's many things that we're trying to do, and we focus in on. I would start with it's been said a few times, but I do think that cohesive systems, really across a very integrated and complex tech stack, really do drive um, really the experience there and help that scale. So that's not just a WMS. That's really across the whole value stream and supply chain. And so it starts up front. How can we help pre-sale all the way through to OMS into the WMS, and then really TMS, and then any other reporting capabilities that's required. And so the system is, as Maddie alluded to, around like making sure that our system shows the right visibility and then affords the ability from that scale that they're looking for, is paramount. Um, I would just kind of add into that this area does help navigate a lot of the challenges and communication and visibility that are required. We've mentioned it a few times that as brands continue to scale, inventory is paramount. So we want to make sure that our systems have high integrity and real-time visibility, from how we control inventory at a location level to cycle counting that's done within the fulfillment centers to be able to provide that visibility in one facility, as we mentioned, or across many. And then I think it's also just this idea around how do we optimize processes between channels for inventory placement. I think the other things that we're doing and just acknowledging the last question is really we want to make sure that we specialize in each service offering. There's not a one size fits all between direct to consumer, retail, and marketplaces. It's really important to remember, like, we want to have some processes that diverge where needed. You can't necessarily force a specific channel through automation that's intended for a very different means. And so as Cart, we think about that and we want to be very intentional about how we isolate and we think about each requirement of each channel for each process for each customer to meet those, in customer expectations. And they change wildly between an omnichannel standpoint. Operational execution and excellence is really important, obviously, as this should be something that is understood and expected and not a requirement or a piece of negotiation. But we, as a partner, we're looking to meet brands that are scaling as a equal or stronger partner in this means as far as our ability to deliver. We need to make sure that we are experts from an omni-channel perspective, understanding what the retail guidelines and adherence rules are, ASN and EDI accuracy, labeling requirements, what on-time fulfillment and on-time in full performance looks like. And then obviously, as ILIA has a large peak, we obviously want to be experts around how to scale labor and make it so that That's not even a question. I think about it in a little bit different ways, is in this partnership, we want to drive the value to our clients and if I just think about it in a really simple way, I thought about it as the first thing we want to try to do is help offload decisions. In the startup story that Maddie shared earlier, there was a lot of human intervention and a lot of kind of sweat equity in growing the brand. And as you partner with a 3PL, I would hope that we're able to help offset some of that decision-making offload and pressure because we are capable and we have the expertise that you're looking for across the board. And so that's really important to us is to help hopefully make things easier and that we're more focused in these areas of expertise that we bring to the table. The other thing is I would hope we evolve and help the relationship evolve from we're better from a consistency side versus heroics. Maddie, I don't know if you would agree, but it sounded like in the early days there were a
Absolutely.
lot of heroics in your initial 3PL. Obviously, we still are a very entrepreneurial and very agile company. Our founder is very vocal about his kind of deep integrated belief in being entrepreneurial, and that's integrated into our culture. But there is, in a sense of fulfillment, you want more consistency and not so much last minute heroics across the board. And so, performance from an SLA and accuracy, quality is all very important. And reliability is probably more valuable at this stage than occasional over performances. And so I think that's really important for us to think about how we work and what we bring to the brand experience at this stage. And then the last thing is just, how do we just continue to be a better partner and avoid risks and kind of be more thought forward thinking versus we don't want to be very kind of retroactive and always reactionary. And so that's another key important piece for us. And ultimately, as brands are growing and scaling, Cart should really be the ones that are helping shoulder some of the risk or some of the pressure versus the brands just still always feeling like they're absorbing all the risk and pressure as they're thinking about expansions and how to scale appropriately.
Thanks, guys. I just want to do one, I think, last quick question before we turn it over to the Q&A. There's a bunch of questions in the Q&A already. If anybody on the line wants to ask a question, please put that into that feature, and we'll get to those in a couple of minutes. But Maddie, I'll do one last question for each of you. Joe, if you were advising a brand at $30 to $50 million in revenue, thinking about their first retail expansion, what's the one thing to get right before that conversation?
Yeah, I would just I would go with inventory and compliance to a process is probably the one thing to really get it put in place to enable that scale and that retail expansion. Retail requires it that you have to have a really clear commitment to a promise against a PO and then the systems in place behind it and the compliance standpoint behind it to meet those expectations. Where my experience would be that retail, the biggest problem isn't necessarily just pure demand, although it can be extremely volatile and overwhelming at times. But it's actually if you miss a commitment and if you miss the quantities or the ship windows or the routing and compliance requirements, it's a real problem and a real challenge. And so as you think about this next step, I would think through how you're going to manage your inventory and then the systems and processes behind it that would enforce a compliant process.
Maddie, I'll give you a two-part question to round things out here. First, what is the operational challenge you're most focused on right now? We've talked a lot about things that have been fixed over time, but curious, like what's on your radar at the moment. And then for the total audience here, what do you wish you'd known 3 years ago that you know now?
Yeah, the probably the thing that we're really focused right now on is it might be a boring answer, but it's supply chain complexity and operational consistency. Just like Joe said, having consistency and not needing to pull up and pull things out of a hat day to day is really, really important. But we are still, as a brand, growing very significantly year over year. So, for example, we are taking Amazon in-house this year. We are expanding internationally into many, many new countries in our DTC channel. We are onboarding several new accounts this year. Having consistency within ongoing operational complexity is extremely important, right? And I appreciate, Joe, the sentiment that the 3PL should absorb risk and should help lift the brand. But the brand also really needs to think smartly about how you set your 3PL up for success. Really, your 3PL is there to fulfill your orders. Any type of complexity that you're introducing that prevents them from fulfilling their orders as fast as possible, you need to be responsible for helping unlocking that for them. In addition, in terms of like what is something I wish I knew 3 years ago that I know now, I think as leaders, sometimes we think about we can get 95% of the way there, it's good enough. But from an operational perspective, that 5% is going to absolutely kill you in terms of time, bandwidth, errors, money. So it would be taking that 5% extremely seriously 3 years ago and really earnestly building an automation then and ongoing to reduce the manual touch points that we're having to still string things together.
Thank you both. I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A here. We had a question come through for you, Maddie. If you had the chance to go back to the first day, what would your stack of ERP, 3PL, and operations to allow scale for D2C and eventually B2B look like based off where you're at now?
That's a great question. I think you need to, I really believe that a linear tech stack is the right way to go. Your ERP sits in the middle, your order inbounds sit on top, and your 3PL sits on the bottom. So that allows you to scale because if you can think about all of your order inputs, those will change and grow over time. You might start with just D2C, but then you're going to need to bolt on, you're going to expand into Whole Foods or Walmart or Target or Sephora. You're going to need to onboard an EDI partner that can feed into your ERP. You may have, there's a tons of marketplaces, TikTok and the like. A lot of those plug into Shopify. I would also would have, even though this didn't really exist at that time in 2019, the way that it does now, I would have pushed for a B2B platform. It's like an e-commerce platform, but for smaller non-EDI retailers to order through to really simplify how I get orders into my ERP. And then I would choose an integration partner that is extremely flexible in the nodes that it can manage. So what integration partner is really the right one that can scale and grow with me to source, not only D2C orders, but B2B orders of all types into your single record of truth. Have all of your manufacturing, all of your inventory, all your financials in there. And then your 3PL is your last piece of that tech stack where you're sending orders through fulfillments, and the fulfillments are flowing all the way back through.
Thanks. I'll turn this question to both of you. I'm curious if you'll have similar answers or if there will be a bit of a divergence here. But at what order volume do you guys each think it makes sense to move away from in-house fulfillment? Maddie, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I would say it really depends on how what your in-house fulfillment looks like. Because I've worked at a brand that had in-house fulfillment and it was fantastic. And there was no need because from a unit perspective, we're not going to grow in a meaningful way for us to outsource that work to someone else. But really, you know, it's a trade-off. Are you going to be able to scale your labor force and your operational technology in your in-house fulfillment in a way that a 3PL would, because they have perhaps different capital to invest in those types of changes? So I wouldn't say that there's a specific order volume, but certainly if you're not able to fulfill your D2C orders within one business day and you're not able to fulfill your B2B orders within their ship windows, you got to move.
Great answer.
I don't actually disagree. I would say that that makes a ton of sense, and my answer was slightly it's similar. It's really around corporate strategy and corporate focus. There are companies that are massive that do in-house fulfillment, and they are wildly successful. So it's not necessarily a volume, and at that volume, we must shift. It's really around the core competencies that you're building as a company. And if your focus is building a brand, and if that brand is an extension of fulfillment, if that's the competency that you want, or you feel like that makes sense to outsource that as well, because the competency you need to focus on is how to accelerate the brand growth, and how to see, more marketing focus, or how to deal with product development, right? Like there's a focus as a company that you're at and needs to. There's certainly signals that say that maybe you're not doing well, and that you should explore that. And Maddie, you great example that you provided around just some like simple performance metrics. Certainly that's one. I think the other ones would be just around your systems and your capabilities that you have as a team. If you're insourced, you may not want to make those investments in technology and or infrastructure. And so there's some on-time performance signals, but then there's also, as you think about the roadmap of your organization, there might be not an appetite to really make large-scale investments to support the growth, going in single channel or multi-channel. So I don't think that there's a threshold per se either. It's much more around alignment to a corporate strategy and what makes sense for your business.
Thanks, Joe. I'll stick with you for this next one. How does Cart handle peak periods for a brand like ILIA, which can come frequently, sometimes in predictable periods like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or holiday? But how do we sort of absorb those volume spikes when they happen suddenly?
And the best way that we work is, Maddie models this all the time for us actually, which is through great communication and partnership. As a 3PL, we want to be we want to serve and we want to do well as a company and as a team. And sometimes that success is predicated on how much visibility or insights we have, and how well the teams are co-planning and co-communicating. And so it's really important for us to have active communication, active partnership as we think through just surges in volume, Q4 or other. And, it's paramount for us to then internally have flexible solutions that can meet those surges in demand. And so along the way, here for ILIA, we did make some changes as far as how we fulfill, because of scale and kind of rapid scalability requirements. We think that there are thresholds where automation makes sense per product category, product type. And so a lot of that is dependent on the surge of volume. And so for ILIA, we did make changes over time because we were recognizing the rapid volume spikes that we were seeing, and the requirements still there for on-time shipping. So there are ways to offset that risk, but it really starts and stops with communication and planning, and co-planning and alignment on what that needs to look like. And then from a fulfillment standpoint, we need to be able to be experts and aware of solutions that provide kind of rapid flexibility and scalability, and align to that within our operations.
Yeah, and I think we have time for maybe one or two more here. But Maddie, there's a question in here. A lot of those operations and things can become cumbersome and near full-time jobs. So, just on the retailer compliance side of things, in terms of their requirements for like chargebacks, routing guides, etc., how do you manage those compliance requirements from the retailer without it becoming a full-time job?
We really lean hard on our Heartt B2B team to manage accurate compliance and routing for those retailers. And we also lean very heavily on our EDI provider to ensure that EDI transmissions are being signed correctly. So we partner with both EDI and Heartt to ensure that things are done correctly. On top of that, having someone on your fulfillment team that is an expert in resolving these types of issues is extremely important. I would not recommend that you have someone kind of learn on the job, have someone learn from an expert on your team. Make sure that you have someone really solid that can work very, very adeptly with your EDI partner and your fulfillment partner to resolve any issue as soon as it comes up. Because what I think where the full-time job comes from is if you're not on top of it and it snowballs, it will become a full-time job.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one final question, which I think we've touched on a little bit, but probably worth rehashing just a touch. So, brands that are D2C only today and thinking about Sephora or another retailer in the next 18 months, what's one thing to get right from an operations perspective before that conversation?
Yeah, I
Uh,
actually think, yeah, what do you think? I think this one is, you live this one. I'd love to maybe go back to that where you commented on it. What's your thoughts?
yeah. Very first thing, can your fulfillment partner do D2C and B2B successfully? That is you will not be successful if your fulfillment partner is the best at D2C only, but they are inexperienced at B2B. You need to go to your warehouse. You need to talk to the person on the floor that's managing your major big box retailer today and validate fully that they know exactly what they're doing. Beyond that, it's about inventory planning, forecasting. And I think if I had to choose a third one, you need to decide in the next 12 months what you do when you do not have enough inventory to satisfy both your D2C and your B2B channel. Who is your tiebreaker? Who gets priority? What type of strategy is in place so that you've already had all of the conversations before your best-selling product is going to run out of stock.
Yeah, Joe, did you want to add to that one?
No, no, actually, I think that's great to hear. I like it. I like the added inspection. Maddie, we hadn't touched on that yet in the initial conversation, so I think that's great. Coming to the floor and having like real-time conversations and seeing, one, do we do it? To where in the network, where else do we have experts, or the whole evaluation concept. I think that's great, and I like the opportunity to prove it. So no, nothing to add there.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we'll pause it there. So that'll be a wrap on today's session. Madeline and Joe, thank you both for joining us today and for providing your insight. For everyone watching, look out for a recording of this webinar in your inbox. If something in today's conversation is relevant to where your brand is at right now, please do reach out to us. We're happy to have a specific conversation. And thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.